Bibliography is a list of references that appears at the end of your coursework. You're referencing the same sources in your bibliography as in the footnotes, but there are some small differences you need to be aware of. The order your footnotes are in is dictated by the order in which you've mentioned or quoted your sources, but bibliographies are arranged more systematically. Firstly, you have primary sources, so you'll have a list in alphabetical order of any cases you've used. You'll also have a separate alphabetical list of any legislation that you've used. Once you've done that, you then list your secondary sources. I'll show you a sample bibliography later in this video so you can see what I mean. For sources that have individuals as authors, such as books, book chapters and journal articles, you need to flip their names round. Again, I'll show you an example of this in a moment. The final point on this slide is one that students often forget. What you need to remember is that the bibliography and footnotes are doing different jobs. Often in a footnote, you want to draw your reader's attention to a particular part of a source. This could be a page in a book, a paragraph in a case, or a section of an act, for example. In OSCOLA, we call this pinpointing. In the bibliography, you're just telling your reader about the source generally. So you don't need to pinpoint particular pages, paragraphs, or sections in your bibliography. As I said earlier, authors' names are one of the few things that have different rules in the bibliography. If you're not sure how to create footnotes for books or journal articles, there is a separate video on that topic. The golden rule in footnotes is you write the author's name the way they write their name. If they've used their full first names, as Emily Finch and Stefan Fafinski have done here, then you use their full names. If, on the cover of the book, they had chosen to call themselves E. Finch and S. Fafinski, then you would call them that. In bibliographies, though, we ignore that golden rule. Everybody's name gets flipped and initialized. So Emily Finch becomes Finch E. Stefan Fafinski becomes Fafinski S. See what I mean? Flip and initialize. This may seem pedantic, but it really helps your readers. When you arrange your sources into alphabetical order, the reader can then very quickly run their eye down the left-hand margin and find the source they're interested in. If the author is an organisation rather than a person, then the name isn't changed. You wouldn't flip Home Office into Office H, for example. I want to draw your attention to a couple of details in this sample bibliography. Firstly, you'll see I've got my cases separated out at the top. These are in alphabetical order. Secondly, I've got my legislation. Again, this is in alphabetical order. Remember, we don't need to provide pinpoints in the bibliography, so I haven't pinpointed any sections, just the whole acts. Finally, I have my secondary sources. This is things like books, journal articles, briefing papers, websites, etc. Many people subdivide their secondary sources, so they have a list of books, a separate list of journal articles, a separate list of websites, etc. It doesn't matter too much whether you choose to split your secondary sources list up by type or not. This decision may be led by how many secondary sources you have and what they are. The main thing to remember, though, is that primary sources, namely cases and legislation, should always be separated from your secondary sources. And you can see in this example how the author's names have been flipped and initialized, and then the secondary sources are put in alphabetical order. You can now watch any of the other OSCOLA videos in this series and also find good quality OSCOLA advice and guidance on the library website. And do get in touch with me if you're still stuck or confused.